Some of these terms are very intuitive. You've used them your whole life, but some of them are extremely important, especially how they're applied in anatomy and physiology. So read through these terms. For this particular slide, you will see the terms superior and inferior attached to a lot of structures, and you'll definitely see the terms anterior, and in the human body, it is basically synonymous with being ventral or towards the belly side. So anterior or front, ventral or belly side for the human would be the same, whereas posterior or dorsal being backside, posterior being the backside also, of course, and these are kind of synonymous in the human body. So again, all of these terms you will see over and over, and you will see them used in naming certain anatomical features. A few other very important terms is medial, meaning towards a midline. If you drew a midline down the middle of somebody, whatever is towards that would be medial. Lateral then would be away from that midline. Proximal would be close to the trunk of the body. And instead of intermediate, I wish they had put the term distal, because it's kind of the opposite of proximal. So we would say something proximal is closer to the trunk, something distal would be further away. These things can become important, especially when studying things like muscles. Here are some very common landmarks on the front side, anterior side of the body. So familiarize yourself with the terms and what is referring to, and again, we will go over these in more detail in lab. See the same thing on the posterior side. Again, some more terminology that you're going to see, so you need to get used to the terms now, but you'll be able to apply them to several parts of the body and several topics that we'll discuss. We live in a three-dimensional world, so we can actually divide our body up into three body planes. The sagittal, or in this case mid-sagittal, because it's separating the body into equal left and right parts. The frontal, which is separating the front and back of the body, also called the coronal plane. And then the transverse plane, which is basically separating the top from the bottom of the body, and of course that can be moved in different sections. But this is particularly important when we're talking about medical imaging or imagery, and so we'll know kind of what perspective we're actually seeing the body from. The body actually, has several cavities inside of it. These cavities are important because they actually allow the specialization of the organs to develop. And it also helps us classify where things are at in the body and how things are related. So notice that we basically have a dorsal body cavity. What's going on in the back side, even though it does go up into the actual brain cavity, cranial cavity area, that seems like part of that's anterior, but if you look at the majority of this space, it does connect through. The vertebrae actually surround this, and the skull surrounds these two cavities. Then we have the ventral body cavity, which again means belly side, or the anterior side of the body, and we actually do see it's divided up into the thoracic cavity, which is closed off, not completely, but separates it from the abdominal pelvic cavity by the diaphragm. In our abdominal pelvic cavity, we see that the upper portion is the abdominal cavity, the lower portion is the pelvic cavity. We can actually divide our abdominal pelvic area into quadrants, or 4 different parts. So one really important thing that we need to make clear here now is that when we say right, we mean the picture's right, the patient's right, the other person's right. Not necessarily our perspective, but the perspective of what we're talking about. So in the picture, I may be on the opposite side, but his right is still his right. So notice we have a right upper quadrant, and then below it we have a right lower quadrant. On his left side, we have a left upper quadrant and a left lower quadrant. Extremely important to keep our rights and lefts correct. Okay, not only do we divide the abdominal pelvic region into quadrants, we can also divide it into regions. So we will cover these regions in lab, but go ahead and get familiar with the terminology. And of course, we need to, if we're not familiar already, we need to become very familiar with the major organs in our in our body, and in this case we see major organs in both the thoracic cavity and the abdominal pelvic cavity. So we will be dissecting some things in the lab and looking at these even further, both through dissections and models.